Hello, I'm Neil Nunes with the BBC News. The Russian President Vladimir Putin is preparing to announce the annexation of 4 regions of Ukraine that have been partially conquered by his army. Ukraine has said it'll continue to fight for their liberation, as Hugo Beshega now reports from Kyiv.
The Ukrainians are saying that nothing really changes because this is a process with no legitimacy, and they said that the so-called referendums were going to be used by the Kremlin as an excuse for a land grab, and this is exactly what is about to happen. Earlier this week I interviewed one of the president's top advisors, and he told me, look, the Russians are there, they've invaded those regions, they've destroyed dozens of cities, killed thousands of people. So what else can happen? So obviously I think there is the fear that the Russians may say that any attack on those regions will be seen as an attack on Russia itself. We've heard threats from Russia about the possibility of nuclear weapons being used.
A huge search and rescue effort is continuing in Florida in the aftermath of Hurricane Ian, which cut a coast-to-coast swathe of destruction across the U.S. state. Boats and helicopters are being used to reach flood-stricken communities. John Sudworth has this report.
As the storm moves away from Florida, officials here are assessing the damage. The state governor, Ron DeSantis, called the Category 4 hurricane a once-in-500-year flood event, which left hundreds of people in need of rescue and significant damage to property. President Biden said it could turn out to be the deadliest hurricane in Florida's history, although so far the official number of fatalities has remained in low single figures. But Hurricane Ian has not finished yet. Although significantly weakened by its journey across the Florida peninsula, it is now heading back towards the U.S. coastline, with warnings in place in South Carolina.
Australia is scrapping rules requiring people to isolate for 5 days if they test positive for COVID, one of its last remaining pandemic restrictions. From Sydney, here's Phil Masser.
The Chief Medical Officer, Paul Kelly, said the country's emergency response to the virus was coming to an end. But he warned that the pandemic wasn't over, and he expected infections to peak again in the future. Australia has been recording about 5,500 new cases each day. It did have some of the world's toughest coronavirus measures and closed its borders to most foreign nationals for more than 2 years.
Police in the Afghan capital Kabul say a blast at an educational center has killed at least 19 people and injured 27 others. They said a suicide bomber had blown themselves up. There's no admission of responsibility so far. World news from the BBC. The British Prime Minister Liz Truss and her Finance Minister Kwasi Kwarteng have a meeting today with the country's independent economic watchdog following days of turmoil in the financial markets resulting from last week's mini-budget. Downing Street has rejected suggestions the pair are holding an emergency meeting with the Office for Budget Responsibility OBR. One reason for the market chaos is thought to be Mr. Kwarteng's decision to reject the OBR's offer of a forecast for the mini-budget. The main presidential candidates in Brazil have traded accusations of corruption in their final televised debate before Sunday's election. Katie Watson watched the debate.
Brazilians had to stay up late to watch this. Only once the country's much-loved soap opera was over could the hotly anticipated debate begin. And for those who wanted more drama, they weren't disappointed. Candidates disregarded the rules, the presenter tried to bring them into line like a disapproving father, and there were angry exchanges between the two leading candidates who dominated the more than 3-hour debate. There were few surprises. Jair Bolsonaro called Lula a criminal. Lula in turn accused his rival of being a liar. We've heard it before, but amid growing threats of political violence, there's no doubt tensions high ahead of Sunday's vote.
A fire has caused extensive damage to Paraguay's National Electoral Commission in the capital Asunción. The commission head Jaime Bestard said more than 8,000 voting machines were destroyed, but he pledged that December's presidential primaries would still go ahead. NASA and Elon Musk's SpaceX company have agreed to study the feasibility of using one of his Dragon capsules to extend the working life of the Hubble Space Telescope by boosting it into a higher orbit. Mr. Musk will fund the 6-month investigation. BBC News.